Kia ora koutou. Welcome to our next session, after lunch session for our Institutional Repositories Community Day for Aotearoa New Zealand, and welcome to all of our Australasian colleagues as well. Thank you very much for joining. This session is a traditional unconferencey kind of session, in that it's a bit of a round table on where we are with institutional repositories. I initially, when I put the session together, I thought that I obviously had a bit of a downer on them, to be perfectly frank. I thought that institutional repositories were had a limited lifespan. I always have. I wrote 10 years ago, I wrote a chapter in a small book we did on open access in Aotearoa, that institutional repositories were an interesting transitional method for open access to pressure publishers into providing us with open access. I've kind of changed my opinion on that in the last couple of months. The first thing that that really occurred to me was with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation stopping paying for article processing charges, and regarding preprints as being the method for open access if things weren't open access in the first place. So that put institutional repositories and repositories in general in the light, and preprint servers as well. The other thing that that has moved me a little bit is hearing people like Max and Yanan talk in our previous session about how versatile they find their institutional repositories. That as we move from the same collections in libraries, separated by geography, that we have, you know, Marx and Shakespeare and all the stuff, to being a distributed global network of our own material that we are sharing to the world, and using institutional repositories to share that, into inverted quotes, publish them. Potentially we do have, they do still provide a really valuable service. So that's the question I'd like to put to you. And I'd like to, for anyone who wants to unmute themselves and to join us in the conversation about whether we want, whether we think that institutional repositories have a place, or whether we want them all to be in the cloud, or whether we think that open access publishing has got to the point where institutional repositories have kind of served their purpose. So I'm going to leave that open to anyone who wants to join me in a discussion about it.
Anton, I'll kick the ball rolling from a financial point of view, if that's okay.
Yep.
I would argue that repositories still hold a valid place based on the finance of the research institution. The cost of open access publishing is absolutely skyrocketing, causing more and more researchers to divest into more and more authors to simply pay the costs. And it is, I believe, again, statistically prove me wrong, that it's actually still the most cost-effective way we have of producing true open access publishing available, because the gold model is becoming horrific. The transitional models, which are moving from green to gold, are just dropping off our radar, and I'm seeing students, young researchers come along, say, where can I publish for free? So so even if they're doing traditional publishing, we can still put a copy in there so it's still available. So it's still an economic decision based purely on that, on no other choices. But yeah, offering what students have asked me, young researchers have asked me this year, the number one concern is price. Where can I afford to publish? And I see that as a repository as our option.
I'm happy to jump. Oh, sorry.
You go, Paula.
Okay. I would just like to add that one of the things that I think repositories add value to an institution is that while we're seeing the proportion of our journal articles published open access is going up, thanks to the call, read and publish agreements, what we're finding, as Dave said, is that there's a lot of other materials that our researchers want to publish without having to pay to publish. And that would include briefing paper series, working papers. We have, of course, our higher degree theses, and even a number of monographs have been published via our repository. So we will mint a DOI for them. And so the repository becomes a publishing platform. So we are the source of the published version. And we're able to surface all of that content through, we've basically created an open press, which has our open access learning resources, some open texts, but all of those things that we are publishing through the repository, we actually surface through there as well. So it doesn't include all of the Elsevier journal articles, just the things we have published. And that list is getting longer and longer all the time. And without the repository, all of those things would just be on a web page here and there and probably unfindable.
That's a very good point, Paula, that a PDF on a web page does not a journal make. And trying to express how that might be and lower the barrier of entry for publishing in that, I think is a very good thing. There's a lovely article, I'll post a link to it later, called, it's old, it's called the Once and Future Publishing Library. And I think that it influenced me enormously when I started this job. Talking about exactly that, how that we can do that. I'm also interested, and it's interesting to have some people from Australia online. The perception in Australia of what the institutional repository provides, not proof of it going from a something that provided proof of publishing for funding and for research quality exercises to a thing for green open access. Has that changed in Australia? Or because that seemed to be the perception I got of our Australian repositories, where the focus was.
Well, I don't want to talk for the whole of Australia, but in my opinion, it varies. I think different institutions have bought into green open access to various levels. At QUT, we've bought into it big time from the beginning. So we've been obviously very keen. We chase up those manuscript versions if the published version is not open access. But what I find really exciting is all of those other publishing options that the repository is presenting now. And some of those things are actually our most downloaded items.
Absolutely, and theses are remarkably popular as well. Yeah. Max, you were.
Yes, kia ora. So shout out to Paula's t-shirt, which must be the best t-shirt of this session. We had Max from Vic had the best t-shirt in the morning session. So I guess what I was going to say kind of ties in, and I'm not from a librarian background, but more from a research management university PBRF kind of background. So I think from my perspective, the great thing about repositories, institutional repositories, is having control over what you share, how you present it, what collections you build. So it does tie in with what Paula was saying. It's a great way to publish items. Depending on your repository, you've got the opportunity to profile things in different ways and to publish journal series or publish special collections. So I think, there's a difference between individual academics wanting to be able to publish things as open access and make that accessible. But there's a different point of view for an institution that wants to understand what its collective research effort is and to be able to represent that in a way that sort of ties into whatever strategic research promotion goals it might have. So from that perspective, I think it still has value, I guess, in the scheme of universities and other organizations. The value versus how expensive that is to keep running is probably a big consideration. But when you're looking at the other options, like not having to pay for APCs, being able to share your theses with the world, there are so many other benefits that go along with the somewhat minimal cost of implementing and maintaining a repository.
And thanks, Max, and thanks for bringing up that point about there are many ways to achieve this, and some of them are through running your own service. And as we know, I worked a long time in the open source community, and we have many meanings of the word free. Free as in speech, free as in beer, i.e., getting a free beer, and free as in kittens, which the kittens are free, but they're gonna cost you. And I think repositories are free as in kittens. There is a cost to it. And I noticed as we fracture, and we're talking, I'm interested to talk to some people about this in our next session, where people talk about moving to other software platforms, how, what the cost drivers are for that. Is it cheaper to maintain something in the cloud? And as you know, I'm a fan of digital science and the products there, but we still run DSpace. And we've heard in previous sessions where the differences are. And I've also been in software long enough to know that there's always rubs, right? There's always concerns happening. I'd like to think that, but I also like to, Richard White wrote me a little email previously, and I see he's on the call. And it was about rights retention. And I wonder if there is an opportunity when you're running your own press, running your own publishing situation, that it brings to light how we manage things like rights retention. Richard, do you want to talk to that?
Tēnā koe, Anton. Kia ora koutou. Thanks, yeah. I like how you said Richard previously wrote to me. It was this morning after the first session, so it was giving you a massive amount of time to consider the thing I wrote through. So here at Otago, for those who don't meet, so I'm at the University of Otago, so I'm not a librarian. I am manager copyright and open access, so my brain is in that space more than repository space, but like to think of myself as repository adjacent. So our IP rights policy is going to be reviewed. So I've got the opportunity. This may be news to other Otago people on the call, actually, even because it's not really been promulgated yet. But I heard whisperings, and I got my foot in the door, and we will have the chance, therefore, to look at the issue of rights retention. For those who don't kind of know what rights retention is about, so it's normally your employer owns all your stuff that you make, right? But we tend to do that differently in universities. Actually, QUT is different from most universities, Paula. You have an interesting one in that your institution just owns everything and then assigns certain rights to, but not the copyright, for example. I think I'm correct in saying this. There's one way of doing it. You can own everything as an institution, right? And that's the default under law. But most universities actually say that our researchers, when they write scholarly papers or conference presentations or write books or whatever, they own the copyright in that stuff. Typically, the institutions will also say, but if you discover a cure for cancer, we own that and we'll make the millions of dollars off it and you might get some of that, etc. Right? So rights retention is about how those rights are divvied up. And the approach that's been taken in various places around the world. Harvard is famously the first place to really adopt this kind of policy in about 2008, is to say, we are going to actually kind of siphon off enough rights so that you literally can't, as an author, give away all your rights to a publisher. So it's a way of kind of taking hold of enough rights that you have to begin with, that traditionally researchers would then give to publishers, and that's how we've gotten the situation where they own everything, they rent access back to us and are able to charge us for the stuff we wrote and reviewed, etc. And also make new money by licensing that content to AI companies to train their models, etc. This is all. So this whole issue around digital sovereignty that we're sort of talking more and more about. So the rights retention is part of that. So the way I'm looking at it here is, so you can sort of say, well, the university owns everything except for copyright in your scholarly works that you produce, but the university retains the right under a non-exclusive license. So you own the stuff still, and you can give it to a publisher if you want. But we've got this right that we've secured right at the beginning of the process to be able to make that work available to the world. There's a few nuances around whether that is accepted by publishers or not. Anyway, so we've got the chance to look at that at Otago. So I was wondering if anyone else is looking at this in their institutions. I'm not aware of any in Australia or New Zealand where a specific rights retention policy is in place, but people may correct me on that. And therefore, if anyone else also is thinking about implementing a rights retention policy. So as I say, the basic idea is under Copyright Act and through your employment agreement with your staff, you kind of keep these rights to prevent it being given away holeless bolus to publishers. So anyone else working in that space?
At Lincoln, no, but it's a space that if you can come up with a model that's likely to work and not cause too many howls of outrage from academics, then I'd be quite keen to try and copy it over here. So yeah, keep us in the loop.
Mm.
In the
anyone else?
In the remembering that hard cases make bad law, there is at the moment a story that's bubbling up of people having theses taken out of their repositories and then self-published through Amazon by another party, not thesis author. Even though the thesis author retains the copyright of it. The reason why I think that something like this might be interesting is that when we respond to someone like Amazon to say, that's not such a great call, they say, are you the copyright holder? And we say, no, the author is the student. And they say, well, you can't talk to us about it. And even though this is such an obvious, bad, poor behavior. So even, as I said before, even though this is kind of like an interesting thing and a difficult one, and those aren't necessarily the best things to make policy on, the ability for the university with slightly deeper pocket than researchers and students, and I see students as researchers, might be useful. I can see an argument for that, but at the same time, what is the appetite for risk? So you get to the point of, well, let's just not put in our theses online. And because that's the low risk opportunity. Yeah. So again, if anyone else would like to speak to that.
To me, it's all related to the things that Max and Dave were saying earlier. I think there's a couple of different aspects to that. What Max was saying about kind of owning what you've made, and you can't rely on anyone else other than your own institution to actually be the permanent archive of your stuff, and therefore be able to put your own lens over the top of that. I think that's also that's rights retention is a way of ensuring that. So if you can secure those rights, that mean you can basically put any of your research, not the final published version probably, but that's how you kind of tailor the policy to apply only to certain versions of the work. That's your key to ensuring that your institutional record is preserved as well, I think.
Mel has just responded to you saying that they're starting to having rights retention conversations at Waikato. Mentioning Waikato, I'm a student there at the moment, and I know that they have a very deep and long history with talking about more than rights, sovereignty, and that these things may not, as we saw in the local context discussion first thing this morning, these things may not fit necessarily neatly into a Pakeha/Western framework.
Yeah, just to add that we're I don't think policies have even been mentioned, but it's more trying to get people to understand, and especially people at the top. So kind of, I think Michelle is just going to be speaking about rights retention at Research Committee, because if they don't understand it, then we've got no hope of getting a policy.
The best way to sell it, going back to what Deborah was saying as well, is to say that it actually benefits you as researchers, because it means you are keeping hold of the thing you made. You can still publish, you can do whatever you like and publish in the places, but it ensures that sort of back channel means of making your work available to the world if you haven't been able to publish it in an open access form, or not, as you can always have an opt-out, obviously, that people don't have to do this. But if you've chosen to publish it anyway, you have made it available to the world, whether it's behind a paywall or not.
One really good example, or type of example that you can use, is we had a situation here where an academic had published a, can't remember if it was a chapter or a whole book with a publisher, and then she wanted to use it in her class. And we had to, it must have been a whole book. We had to break the news to her that actually she had signed away the copyright. She was therefore not allowed to make copies of more than one chapter per our copyright licensing scheme. She didn't have the right to use her own work in her own class. And being able to use a really concrete example of how, conversely, if we had a rights retention system in place, we could solve that problem.
The question then is, if I'm a publisher and I have made my money out of renting your work back to you, what encourages me to publish your work if you want to maintain the value of it?
Well, they can still publish it to other people in the world, and by putting it in a publisher database, it makes it more accessible to subscribing libraries, in their catalogues and so forth. I mean, long term, I want to break down all the publishers, they say, but I just got mad at something else I saw this morning about American Chemical Society, but that's sort of a bit of a tangent. So but I mean, publishers still get plenty of benefit out of either getting our work for free or buying it for a pittance. In the case of books, I don't believe authors get a whole lot of money. No one's getting rich off that.
Paula, please.
I just got a comment to make about rights retention. So for the last 18 months, we've actually had a rights retention element to our open access policy. So basically it says that if you are submitting your manuscript to a publisher that doesn't allow at least the accepted manuscript to be made available without an embargo, under a CC license, then you should submit this rights retention statement at the time you submit the manuscript. The trouble with what's happening is that the publishers are making it very difficult for authors to do this. A lot of their platforms don't provide a space to do that. We've suggested they just squeeze it into the manuscript, maybe in the acknowledgement section, but there are lots of barriers that are actually pushing back against the rights retention initiative. And we've yet to see anything come through our repository that's actually got a rights retention statement on it, which is a bit frustrating.
There are different ways to approach the issue of rights retention. And the best way in terms of academic buy-in is for them to basically have to do nothing. So one way is to say you have to include a rights retention statement on your manuscript as you put it in, or as you say, find a box somewhere in the submission form where they can stick some language to that effect. But another way, which has been done at least in the UK, is so I don't know how much people took in of my explanation earlier, but if you've secured those rights, authors can't, once the copyright owner has given that to your institution, the institution's got it. You can't revoke that right. And so basically, one of the issues can be that an author can be said to be breaching the terms of the journal by signing exclusive rights when they don't have exclusive rights because they've already given the university a right. Does that make sense? So the best way to do it is you secure these rights early on, and then your institution has to write to publishers and inform them that any author from your institution has these sets of rights, and therefore that any agreement they make is subject to that. Then the authors don't need to do anything. They don't need to put a rights retention statement in. So that's the way it's been done in certain places. So it takes it out of the hands of academics, which is never a good system if it relies on individual academics to be aware of this and take action accordingly. And that way enables the university to have this perpetual irrevocable license. These are the words you have to put in so that it can't be removed from you, so that the institution can then put anything in the repository that their staff made while they were employed by the institution.
Keely has brought up a good point in the chat. I remember seeing that Spark had an author addendum that it was trying to promulgate on this. So this is European, as far as I know, this is European authors trying to achieve this. Has anyone else heard of this, of where that's gone? Go for it, Paula. You're nodding.
We actually tried that too. So we did a QUT version of the Spark addendum. So this was before rights retention became a thing. And so we actually gave them a letter that they could send that was just a tweaked version of the Spark addendum. Yeah. But it didn't really work either. And I totally agree with Richard that the only way to do this is at the higher level, preferably even at a national level. Yes. I should mention that because we do have these rights that we retain anyway, we go ahead and make the manuscripts available without an embargo on the basis of those retained rights.
Yeah, that's sort of what I would be proposing we do, yeah.
The only thing we don't do is we don't put the CC BY license on it. So prior to us bringing in the rights retention language, our policy said that we were planning to put a CC BY non-commercial license on our manuscripts. So as the rights retention language specifically says that we're retaining the right to put a CC BY on the manuscript, that's the step we don't do, because you can't bring that back if the publisher does actually decide to take action. But so far we've been putting them out there without an embargo, with a CC BY non-commercial. 18 months, we've had no pushback from the publishers on that.
A couple of questions, Paula. So firstly, you mentioned the Spark amendments didn't work, and I agree that rights retention is a better way to go, but I'm just curious, when you say it didn't work, is that because the publishers pushed back and didn't accept it, or is it because authors found it too cumbersome?
I think a bit of both. I think that from the researchers' point of view, they just about give up their firstborn child to get their article published, and anything that they perceive to be a barrier to actually acceptance is going to meet resistance. And we did have a couple of people try to submit it, and the publisher just said, sorry, we've got a standard agreement, take it or leave it. So yeah, it was a bit disappointing.
And with your current approach, you said you haven't had any pushback from publishers. Do you think that's because they see it and they're resigned to it, or perhaps they haven't noticed it yet?
I think they QT is not really big in the world, so it's probably flying under the radar. We don't obviously shine a light on it, but we've had lots of open access copies that are out there in the world as a result of this. So we just keep on doing what we're doing.
Oh, I like the idea of just doing it, and yeah, if you're small enough, and Lincoln's very small, so hey, maybe
The absolute best way for rights retention to work is if it's in your statute. And this has, I'm just going to paste a link in the chat. This has been done in about 7 or 8 European countries. They did put it in their law. Anything that's publicly funded, the institution retains these rights. It's got a year embargo, I think, on most of those. So next time the Copyright Act review comes around, I'll be pushing this idea for no one to listen to. But anyway, it's been done in Germany and the Netherlands and Italy and various places where they just say, well, people are funding this, and therefore it doesn't matter what publishers say, it has to be made available, and here are the rights.
I mean, some major open access thing that was done in the US, is that the same thing or same kind of thing, or is it?
That was, sort of, NIH policy.
Right, so
it's been around for years with a year embargo, but they were making it 0 embargo. I think I'm right in saying that. Could be wider federal government, maybe, was it?
Well,
Can't remember.
There's some, is it for something? I don't think, I can't remember, but anyway, yeah.
But for anyone who's seen a publishing contract that staff on, especially in the health areas, there's a box for federal US employees to tick, which says, I'm employed by the federal government of the United States. There's no copyright in this work. And so publishers still publish that, even though there's no copyright in it, going back to your question, Anton, about the value that, whether it's worth, publishers still doing it. So you're kind of doing the same thing, which is just saying, well, I'm publishing with you, but, there might be a version over here in this lovely repository over here that hopefully you won't take too much notice of, because we're not that important in the grand scheme of things. Yeah.
And that begs the question again of if institutional repositories don't present a threat to publishers, are they worth doing as an agent of, in terms of green open access? Are they worth doing? Is that worth doing as a tactic?
Well, two answers from my perspective. One is that there's a lot of content in IRs, right? Maybe 3 answers. A lot of content in IRs. I mean, we've talked about theses, but we've also got research reports and conference papers and all sorts of things. So there's the grey literature.
Which of course I'm a huge fan of. And
But in terms of articles and book chapters, there's still that value to the university in being able to have its own copy, co-located, so you can easily see what's everything that's been done by this department. That's of huge value. And also as a backup in case publishers get nasty or break down or something. And then thirdly, I think even though publishers have done their best to scuttle green open access, I think that's actually almost a signal that it's worth us keeping going, because they do see it as a threat.
Yeah.
And if we can keep developing the infrastructure, including all the policies and procedures and all of that, it could be a threat. They don't want us to think it is, but they clearly are behaving like it is. So it is.
It's an eggs in one basket thing, right? Going back to what Dave said right at the start, on a purely financial level, the publishers have funneled us very successfully into a new model where we're effectively just paying the same money we've always paid to them, but we're just paying for a slightly different thing, right? But now we've realized, okay, they can just start raising the prices again. And we didn't think of that. So having a repository in green is it's you know, it's a bargaining chip against having your eggs all in the going down the paid open access route, right? You have to have that. If you don't have that, then you've got to go with only paywall deals and all your stuff's closed.
Rudy makes the point that ever increasing embargo periods are showing that the repositories work in terms of green open access. I would also say ignoring the embargo as an act of civil disobedience is called for as well. But that's just me. Em.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, everything that Deborah and Richard have already said, but I'd like all of us to start thinking beyond the are we a threat and is this a problem? I'd like us to start thinking, even if we are a threat, that's actually a good thing. In fact, it's not that we're the threat, and we need to understand that publishers are going to defer that aggro onto us because we're easy to hit. But actually, the threat for them is that research funders are allowing and in fact increasingly preferencing with author rights retention the manuscript versions. That's the threat. That's the conversation. And anytime a publisher tries to make it look like it's the institutional repository that's the problem, I'm going to tell them to be a bit more honest and say, no, actually the problem here for you guys is the fact that your profit models are under threat by research funders. And the public right to public access and all of those things. Yeah,
I'd like to agree with you on that. You're absolutely right, and I have a whole presentation on that tomorrow. Exactly that.
I'll be there.
And exactly how broken all this is. So I'd like to pivot a little bit. Deborah has suggested we talk a little bit about a project she's been involved with that I think is a really interesting and incredibly effective way of increasing our impact of our research. She's been working with theses and Wikidata. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yep. So some people here will be familiar with the project and some people it will be new to. The short version, if I can do that, is that we had the idea of basically playing with Wikidata. What data can we add to Wikidata? If you're not familiar with it, it's basically
Is that me or Deborah?
We've lost you, Deborah.
I think Deborah.
So anyone can add data. Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, you've come back. You were lagging terribly. I know you're back. Yep.
Okay, well, I'll blame the rural Lincoln connection. I'll turn my video off and see if that helps.
Starlink.
Yeah. Oh dear. So we got roped in some Wikidata experts in New Zealand, and I also roped in someone from each of the New Zealand universities and Unitec as well, or Te Pukenga, and everyone submitted their metadata of their entire thesis collection at the time, which is about 2 years ago-ish now. And long story short, we cleaned up all of the metadata, standardized it, and uploaded it to Wikidata. It was just absolutely just really fun, and also the Wikidata experts, particularly Tamsin Brasher, did all of that work. And we're hopefully we have written a journal article and it's in the middle of peer review, so yeah, all of that. But we've also been thinking about what about now that it's been a couple of years, do we want to do a second round of getting all the theses that have been published in the time since? Now, when we first ran this project, everyone was on DSpace, so it was pretty straightforward. And now everyone's on different platforms, so I don't know how much complexity that adds to it. So yeah, that's kind of at this point opening it to the floor is, would libraries be interested in repeating the project? Would it still be fairly straightforward from your point of view, given your new platforms? Are there any extra challenges you see? Oh, and I'll throw in there also one other cool thing that came out of it for us, because when we did it, we were going, we don't know what the benefits will be, but we know there will be some. But one came out that in our repository, we have a supervisor index, so you can browse theses by who supervised them. That was a mess. They'd been entered in all sorts of different ways, and so you'd have one supervisor listed 3 times with variations in spelling. So we got one of our postgrad students to tidy it up. But as part of that, I realized that Tamsin had already done a whole lot of that work in uploading it to Wikidata. So I was able to use that data and give it to him and say, hey, here's all the Wikidata work, you know, details. And so you can use that now to help tidy it up. And we've got another thing with Digital New Zealand where they wanted some data, and I was going, we don't have the data. And then I realized, no, Tamsin created that data. And so I've been able to give that to Digital New Zealand. So yeah, there's been a couple of really great benefits for us.
From DSpace's perspective, it's just become even more trivial almost with Kim's API Python library. It just makes it very, very easy to do something like this.
Oh. What about with Figshare?
Figshare has an API.
Oh yeah.
Matt, are you aware of
Figshare does have an API.
Yeah.
I'm not a technical person, but yeah, all that data is available to, all your data is available to download via the API.
Right, but you need to write a bit of code to pull it out.
Yeah, but
you can export spreadsheets.
Yeah,
exporting
yeah.
spreadsheets.
I was going to say there is also the admin. There is the standard download, which will give you all of the metadata that's in the repository. So that's another easier way. API, API is really more if you want to, you know, do fancy stuff with it. But if you just want data, just take it out of the UI.
The reason I think about an API is simply that once you've established how to do it, you can do it yearly without having to create new. And also the thought that someone else is tidying up your data for you, like Tamsin, and then you can something to push it back in through an API. That's exciting.
Yes, yeah. And originally, the only data we pulled back into the repositories was the QID. I don't know if other libraries have imported that and kept that through their migrations. But so at Lincoln, we'll be able to use that to say, okay, if it's got a QID, we've already uploaded it, we don't need to do it again. If there's universities who don't have that data anymore, then we can still match using the handle or the DOI, as long as those haven't changed. Okay.
I wonder if the Australians on board would be interested in following our lead, because getting Wikidata data ends up in the oddest places. It's astonishing who uses it and where it might end up. So it could prove very useful, especially as a central. Even you could use it as a central point. Em's asking if there's a link to the project.
I can find the link to our Wikidata project, and I think this is the one, which has got, I think, most of our project documents, including, literally how we did it. When we publish the article, we'll put a link there as well, but we'll also send it out to the Aotearoa IR mailing list. But yeah, no, there's lots of information, there's lots of dashboards, because you can do, once it is in Wikidata, you can do all sorts of cool visualizations of the data as well, and you can have lots of fun with it.
But one of the things that I want to do, and I haven't done yet, is to provide a mapped version of this. So as you're traveling, you can see from the metadata if you can grab place names and put that in geographically, so you can go, there's a thesis about this particular bank, or
yeah, and one of our one of the queries more or less does that. I don't think it's down to I can't remember the level of detail it gets down to it, and I think it is based on subject keywords. So you'll get a bit of, depending how big the geographical region is that it's talking about, but you can definitely do things like that. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up again, Deborah. It's an amazing project, and I think just one of those things where we can put information out and wait for the unexpected results.
Yes.
It's the fantastic thing. Has anyone got anything else they want to talk about institutional repositories and things? We are going to be chatting with Lisa and Mandy soon about Targo's new efforts, but is there any
Hello, everyone. Hi, greetings from Auckland Institute of Studies Library. I just have a quick question to all. Has anyone had implemented the OCLC Content DM online repository, or does anyone have experience working with that? No one? No one?
Sorry.
No one?
Sorry, I think we explored it once about 15 years ago and then stopped using it. So.
Okay, because we have just implemented it this year. It's still empty, so I'm waiting to employ a staff member to start working on it as a project and start uploading and visualizing our collections. Landcare Research Library has also implemented it, so all their collections are there. Seems to be working okay. They've showed us how it works, but it seems a rare type of repository in New Zealand, so that's why I'm asking. So anyway, thank you. Just a question. Kia ora.
So Anna's asking about people who are using Atmire. Yes, Deborah, you're getting hosted DSpace, aren't you?
That's right. Yes. Yep.
We are at Waikato as well.
Do you think that there is a useful thing for a community of practice about that? To help, because especially anything to help Te Pukenga.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess our hope is that we won't be with them long term because it doesn't meet data sovereignty. So we would like to try and bring it back. But yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting question. That's an interesting thought, and then that begs another question about how you meet the needs of sovereignty, other than getting an AWS instance or server farm in New Zealand somehow.
Or going with Catalyst. Or
or go
Yep.
with Cat.
Yeah, that's definitely an option that we will be looking at, but at the moment we've signed a contract, so.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to wind us up here for another 5 minutes while I prepare for while I just prepare for our next session. But thank you very much for attending. I'm just going to put myself on mute and then get ready for introducing our colleagues from Otago in about 10 minutes. So thank you very much for a great discussion.